I raised a daughter who used to call me every single day. And for 1 full year, I went to sleep every night to a phone that never rang once. Not on my birthday. Not on Christmas. Not even the night her name showed up on a hospital's caller ID. A call I only found out about 11 months later. My own daughter, alive in a hospital bed, and I wasn't worth a phone call. You want to know what too much costs a woman? It cost me my daughter for 365 days, and it almost cost her a lot more than that. But I didn't know any of it yet. All I knew on the day this story starts was silence. A house so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away, and a framed photo on my mantle of a wedding I paid for, standing next to a man I never trusted for 1 single second. I've spent almost a year convincing myself that silence was love. Not the kind of love you write birthday cards about. Not the kind that gets posted online with smiling family photos and captions about blessings. I'm talking about the kind of love that feels like ripping your own heart out with your bare hands because the person you love keeps asking you to let go. So I did. I stopped calling my daughter. I stopped texting. I stopped asking if she'd eaten. I stopped dropping off soup when she was sick. I stopped reminding her to rotate the tires on her car because winter was coming. I even stopped driving by her neighborhood on Sundays, even though I'd done it for years, just to make sure her porch light was working. Because apparently I was too much. Those were his words, not hers. And the worst part? She let him say them. The day she knocked on my door exactly 1 year later, she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. She had a bruise she kept trying to hide beneath the sleeve of her sweater. And the very first thing she said wasn't, "Hi, Mom." It was, "I finally know why you stopped fighting for me. I wish I could tell you I hugged her immediately. I didn't. Because by then, there were things I knew, things she didn't. And everything we both believed about her husband was about to collapse. I'm 58 years old, widowed, mother to 1 child. My daughter, Emily, was born after 12 years of infertility, 3 miscarriages, and enough heartbreak to make me question whether motherhood was ever meant for me. When people call their child a miracle, it sometimes sounds dramatic. For me, it wasn't. She was the only baby who ever came home. My husband, Daniel, used to joke that Emily would never need GPS because I always knew exactly where she was. He wasn't wrong. I remembered every dentist appointment, every teacher's name, every favorite stuffed animal, every broken heart, every nightmare. When Daniel died from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, Emily was only 14. Overnight, I became both parents. I learned how to fix leaky faucets from YouTube. I sat through softball games pretending I understood the rules. I worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, stopped buying new clothes. Everything extra went into Emily's future. College, her first apartment, her first car. I never regretted a single sacrifice. Not one. Because that's what mothers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. Emily met Ryan when she was 27. At first, I adored him. That's the hardest part to admit. People assume controlling men always arrive waving red flags. Sometimes they arrive carrying flowers. Ryan had perfect manners. He remembered birthdays, sent thank you notes after dinner. He laughed at my jokes, helped me carry groceries without being asked. He called me Mrs. Harper until I insisted he use my first name. He looked like the kind of man mothers prayed their daughters would marry. Maybe that's why I ignored the tiny things. Tiny things don't look dangerous, not until they connect. The first one happened at Thanksgiving. Emily was telling a story about getting lost driving downtown. Before she finished, Ryan laughed. "Oh, don't let her fool you. She gets lost walking through grocery stores." Everyone chuckled. Emily laughed too. I smiled because, well, couples tease each other. That's normal, right? Except every story after that somehow ended with Emily becoming the punchline. She forgot an appointment. Ryan told everyone. She burned cookies. Ryan brought it up 3 months later. She mispronounced a restaurant's name. He repeated it every chance he got. Always smiling, always joking, always just enough to make her laugh along. I noticed something strange. Emily started apologizing for everything. If dinner took 5 extra minutes, sorry. If she interrupted him, sorry. If she couldn't remember where she left her keys. I'm so stupid. That phrase hit me like ice water. Because growing up, Emily never called herself stupid. Ever. One afternoon, they came over for lunch. I'd made chicken pot pie. Emily's favorite since she was 6. She barely touched it. Ryan noticed. You said you were watching Carbs, she blinked. Oh, right. She pushed the plate away. I frowned. You've loved this since kindergarten, Ryan answered before she could. We're trying to eat healthier. We're funny. I never heard Emily say we quite so much until Ryan entered her life. We don't like spicy food. We don't watch horror movies. We don't visit family every weekend. We prefer. We decided. Somewhere along the line, Emily disappeared inside the word we. The engagement happened 6 months later. Everyone cried. I cried too. Mostly because Daniel wasn't there. Ryan hugged me afterward. I'll take care of her. I believed him. God, I believed him. The wedding was beautiful. Simple. Elegant. Emily looked radiant. There was one moment I still replay in my head. Father-daughter dance. Obviously, Daniel couldn't be there. Emily asked me to dance instead. Halfway through, Ryan walked over, smiling. He gently touched Emily's shoulder. Mind if I borrow my wife? People clapped. Thought it was romantic. I smiled too. But inside, something felt wrong. Not because he wanted to dance with her. Because he couldn't let us finish one song. Just one. After the honeymoon, things changed. Gradually, almost invisibly. Calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. Texts took longer to answer. Whenever I asked if she'd like to come over, she always had plans. Ryan's coworkers. Ryan's parents. Ryan's neighbors. Ryan's schedule. Ryan's gym. Ryan's church group. Ryan's friends. One Saturday, I stopped by unexpectedly. Not to spy. Just because I'd baked blueberry muffins. Emily answered the door. She looked nervous. Not unhappy. Just tense. Mom, you should have called. I wanted to surprise you. Before she answered, Ryan appeared behind her. Still smiling. Always smiling. We're actually heading out. He wasn't wearing shoes. Their car wasn't packed. The television was on. Nobody looked ready to leave. I held up the muffins. I'll only stay 5 minutes. Ryan stepped forward. Another day would probably be better. Emily never looked me in the eyes. I handed her the container. Drove home. Cried halfway there. A month later, Emily forgot my birthday. Not just the dinner. The entire day. That had never happened. At almost midnight, she called, sounding exhausted. Oh my gosh, Mom. Before she finished apologizing, I heard Ryan in the background. Babe, are you still on the phone? She lowered her voice. I have to go. That was it. 34 seconds. My birthday. 34 seconds. Friends told me I was imagining things. Newlyweds get busy. Give them space. She's building her own family. I agreed. Out loud. Inside, something kept whispering. This isn't distance. This is permission. Someone is teaching your daughter that loving you is inconvenient. The real turning point happened at Christmas. I'd spent 2 days preparing dinner. Emily always loved Christmas. When she was little, she'd sleep beside the tree because she couldn't wait for morning. This time, they arrived almost 2 hours late. Ryan apologized. Traffic. Fine. It happens. Dinner started. Conversation flowed. Then I mentioned Emily's old scrapbook. The one she'd made with Daniel before he passed away. I smiled. I found it in the attic. Emily's face lit up. I thought it was gone, Ryan chuckled. You still keep childhood stuff? Emily's smile faded slightly. It's sentimental, Ryan shrugged. I guess I'm just not into living in the past. Silence. Tiny. Barely noticeable. I looked at Emily. She quietly folded her napkin, changed the subject. That scrapbook never came home with her. 3 weeks later, she canceled lunch. Again. Then brunch. Then movie night. Then our monthly shopping trip we'd done for almost 20 years. Eventually, I stopped asking. One rainy Tuesday, I got a call from my neighbor, Linda. Is Emily okay? I think so. Why? I saw Ryan at the cafe. So? He wasn't with Emily. I laughed. So? Linda hesitated. He was holding another woman's hand. I froze. Maybe she was mistaken. People make mistakes. Maybe it was work. Maybe. Funny how mothers cling to maybe when the truth hasn't arrived yet. I didn't tell Emily. Not then. Not because I wanted to protect Ryan. Because I wanted proof before I destroyed someone's marriage. I had no idea. By then, someone else was already destroying it. And it wasn't me. For almost 2 weeks after Linda told me she'd seen Ryan with another woman, I said nothing. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared too much. There's a difference. If you've ever been a mother, you know the impossible position I was in. If I accused Ryan without proof, Emily would think I was trying to sabotage her marriage. If I stayed quiet and Linda was right, I'd be betraying my daughter. So I waited. I hated myself for waiting. Every day I picked up my phone. Every day I put it back down. Every day I rehearsed the conversation. Emily, sweetheart, has everything been okay? Too obvious. How are things with Ryan? Too suspicious. Have you noticed anything strange lately? Too vague. I never made the call. I kept telling myself I'd know when the time was right. Looking back, there never is a right time to tell someone their marriage may already be cracking. 3 Sundays later, Emily finally invited me over. The text came at 8:17 in the morning. Want to come by for coffee around noon? I stared at the screen for almost a minute. She hadn't invited me anywhere in months. I immediately typed yes, then deleted it. Didn't want to seem desperate. I waited 10 minutes, then replied. I'd love to. She hearted the message. Just that little red heart nearly made me cry. Funny how little scraps of affection become priceless once you've gone hungry for them. When I arrived, Ryan wasn't home. Emily looked lighter. It took me a few minutes to understand why. The house felt quieter. Not because there was less noise. Because she wasn't watching herself. Have you ever noticed someone constantly checking another person's face before speaking? That's what Emily did around Ryan. Now, she simply talked. She laughed. She wandered into the kitchen without asking anyone if they wanted anything. It reminded me of the daughter I used to know. We sat on the back patio with coffee. Birds chirped. The breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass. For a while, it almost felt normal. Then she sighed. I've been tired lately. I looked at her. She'd lost weight. Not dramatically. Just enough for a mother to notice. You eating enough? She smiled weakly. I'm trying. Not yes. Trying. Then I saw it. A bruise. Just above her wrist. Barely visible beneath the sleeve. I didn't panic. Didn't gasp. Didn't grab her arm. I simply asked, what happened there? She instantly pulled her sleeve down. Oh, she laughed. Too quickly. I bumped into the pantry door. Maybe. People bruise. Life happens. But something inside me whispered, watch her eyes. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring into her coffee. Ryan came home 20 minutes later, the moment his truck pulled into the driveway. Emily changed. It was like watching someone flip a switch. Shoulders tighter, smile smaller, voice softer. He walked onto the patio carrying grocery bags. There are my favorite girls. He kissed Emily, hugged me, asked about my garden. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. If someone had filmed only that moment, everyone would have called him husband of the year. Then he looked at the nearly empty coffee pot. You drank all of it? He laughed. Emily immediately stood. I'll make another. I was kidding. She was already halfway to the kitchen. He looked at me, rolled his eyes playfully. She's so sensitive. I forced a smile. Inside, something twisted, because he hadn't actually been joking. He'd made a criticism, wrapped it in a laugh, and she'd responded like she'd made a mistake. Over lunch, Ryan controlled the conversation without ever appearing to. It's fascinating now that I can see it. He asked every question, interrupted every answer, corrected tiny details no one cared about. If Emily said, "We went to Chicago in April," he'd say, "Late March, actually." If she said, "The restaurant was amazing," he'd reply, "It was decent." Nothing major, nothing obvious, just constant little edits, tiny corrections, little reminders that his version of reality mattered more than hers. By dessert, Emily barely spoke at all. As I was leaving, Ryan walked me to my car. Such a gentleman. Always the gentleman. He leaned against my door. "I appreciate everything you've done for Emily. Of course. But..." There it was. That word. But. "I think she's trying to learn how to stand on her own." I nodded slowly. "I understand. I know you mean well." Another smile. "So maybe," he paused, "less checking in?" There wasn't a single rude word in that sentence. Not one. Yet somehow, it felt like being politely escorted out of my own daughter's life. That evening, Emily called. I answered on the first ring. "Hi, sweetheart." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry if Ryan sounded rude." I frowned. "I didn't think he was rude." Another silence. She stopped. "I don't want anyone to think I can't make my own decisions." My chest tightened. "Emily, I love you. I love you too. But sometimes," another pause, "I feel guilty." Guilty? Like I'm choosing between you and my husband. I closed my eyes. No child should ever feel that way. Not unless someone has convinced them love is a competition. Months passed. The distance grew. Slowly. Patiently. Like mold spreading inside walls. You don't notice until the whole house smells different. Then came Mother's Day. I woke up expecting nothing. Not because Emily didn't love me, because I'd learned not to expect much anymore. At 11 that morning, flowers arrived. Beautiful lilies. My favorite. No card. Just a printed receipt. "Happy Mother's Day." No name. I called Emily. Voicemail. She texted hours later. "Hope the flowers came. Busy today." That was all. Busy today. I spent the afternoon sitting on my porch, watching neighbors visit their mothers, children laughing, cars pulling into driveways. Around 6, I checked Facebook. I wish I hadn't. Ryan had posted photos. Brunch. His mother. His sisters. Emily smiling beside them. Caption. Celebrating the amazing women who shaped our family. Not one picture of me. Not even a mention. I know social media isn't real life. But tell that to a mother who's slowly disappearing from her daughter's world. A week later, I finally did something I hadn't done before. I drove past the cafe Linda had mentioned. Not because I wanted to spy, because I couldn't stop wondering. The parking lot was nearly empty. Then I saw his truck. Ryan. Inside, across from the same blonde woman Linda had described. They weren't kissing. They weren't holding hands. They were laughing, leaning close, sharing a slice of cheesecake. Maybe coworkers do that. Maybe friends. Maybe. Then, she reached across the table, adjusted his tie. His hand rested over hers, only for a second. But long enough that no wife would mistake it. My hands started shaking. I almost walked inside. Almost. Instead, I drove away. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I'd made my decision. Emily deserved to know, no matter what happened afterward. I invited her to lunch. Just us. She agreed. Surprisingly easily. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Dark circles. Forced smile. Half-finished sentence after half-finished sentence. I wanted to ask about everything. Instead, I asked one question. "Are you happy?" She looked confused. "Of course." The answer came too quickly, too polished, like she'd practiced it. I reached across the table, covered her hand with mine. Sweetheart, I saw Ryan. Instantly, she stiffened. What do you mean? At the cafe. Her face went pale. With another woman. Silence. Long. Heavy. Painful. Finally, she laughed. Actually laughed. I know who you're talking about. Relief flooded me. Oh, that's his client, I blinked. His client? He told me you'd probably misunderstand if you ever saw them together. I felt cold. Very cold. He said that? She nodded. He told me you've never really liked him. I stared at her. I've never said that. I know. Did she? I'm just saying. She swallowed. He said sometimes you have trouble letting go. There it was. The beginning. Not an accusation. A seed. A tiny little seed planted months earlier. One designed to make sure that if I ever warned my daughter, she'd already doubt me. And somehow, that realization hurt even more than the possibility of his affair. Because it meant he hadn't just been lying. He'd been preparing her. Preparing her to stop believing me long before I'd ever have a reason to speak. And for the first time, I wondered just how long he'd been quietly rewriting my place in my own daughter's life. After that lunch, I sat in my car for nearly an hour. The engine wasn't running. The radio was off. I just stared through the windshield while people walked in and out of the restaurant carrying on with ordinary lives. I kept hearing Emily's words over and over. He told me you'd probably misunderstand if you ever saw them together. Do you see what he did? I didn't. Not immediately. It took me days to understand the brilliance of it. Ryan hadn't defended himself after getting caught. He had defended himself before anyone even suspected him. That's what terrified me. He wasn't reacting. He was planning. Months in advance. Maybe longer. And if he had prepared Emily to distrust me about one thing, how many other things had he prepared her for? A few days later, Emily called. Her voice sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. Mom, are you free Friday? I should be. We're having a barbecue. We? Ryan invited some people from work. Oh, I'd really love for you to come. Something about her tone felt hopeful, like she needed me there. I said yes without hesitation. Friday afternoon arrived warm and sunny. I baked my famous peach cobbler. Daniel used to joke that no one ever left my house hungry because I cooked like I was feeding an army. Old habits die hard. When I pulled into their driveway, there were already 6 or 7 cars parked outside. Laughter drifted through the open windows. Everything looked normal, perfect, almost painfully perfect. Ryan greeted me at the door with that same effortless smile. There she is! He took the cobbler from my hands. You always spoil us. If kindness could be weaponized, Ryan had mastered it. The backyard was full of people, neighbors, coworkers, a few couples I'd never met. Music played softly through outdoor speakers. The grill sizzled. Children chased each other across the lawn. If someone had snapped a picture at that exact moment, it would have looked like the cover of a family magazine. Emily walked over. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual. You came. Of course I came. She smiled. But there was something tired behind her eyes. As the afternoon went on, I noticed something strange. Ryan was always performing, not in an obvious way, in tiny ways. If someone complimented the food, he'd say, Emily worked so hard. Then quietly whisper to her a few minutes later, you forgot the barbecue sauce. If someone admired the garden, he'd loudly announce, Emily picked all the flowers. Then later, you missed a bunch of weeds over there. Praise in public, criticism in private, just enough to keep everyone believing he adored her, while slowly convincing her she was never quite enough. It was almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. At one point, I found myself standing beside one of Ryan's coworkers, a woman named Carla. She seemed friendly. We talked about gardening, travel, the weather. Then she smiled. Ryan talks about you all the time. I blinked. He does? Oh, yes. My stomach tightened. What does he say? She hesitated. then laughed awkwardly. I probably shouldn't. What? He just worries. Worries? About Emily feeling overwhelmed. I felt my pulse quicken. Overwhelmed by what? Carla looked uncomfortable. I honestly shouldn't be repeating this. I forced myself to smile. It's okay. She lowered her voice. He says you're very involved. There it was again. Not controlling. Not manipulative. Just too involved. Too caring. Too present. He wasn't making me into a villain. He was making me into an inconvenience. And somehow, that was even more effective. Because villains are easy to defend against. Inconveniences? People quietly push those away themselves. On my drive home that night, I realized something else. Ryan wasn't only changing Emily's opinion of me. He was changing everyone else's. One conversation at a time. One harmless comment at a time. By the time anyone questioned him, they'd already heard the story he'd wanted them to hear. Summer slipped into fall. The calls became even less frequent. Sometimes I'd text Emily, thinking of you. She'd answer 2 days later. Love you too. Nothing more. I started deleting messages before sending them. I'd type, do you want to have lunch? Delete. I miss you. Delete. Is everything okay? Delete. Eventually, I stopped typing altogether. Then something happened that I still struggle to forgive myself for. Emily forgot Daniel's birthday, not his actual birthday. The day we always visited his grave. For 15 years, every single year. Rain. Snow. Didn't matter. We brought fresh flowers. We talked. We cried. Sometimes we laughed. It was our tradition. That morning, I waited. 10 o'clock. Nothing. 11. Nothing. Noon. Nothing. At 2 in the afternoon, I finally drove to the cemetery alone. I placed fresh lilies beside Daniel's headstone. Then I sat there. I don't know how to fix this, I whispered. The wind moved through the trees. I think I'm losing her. A voice behind me answered. No, I turned. It was Frank, Daniel's older brother. I think someone is helping you lose her. Frank had always been quiet, observant. The kind of man who noticed details other people missed. We stood beside Daniel's grave for a while. Then he asked, can I tell you something? Of course. I almost didn't come to the wedding. I stared at him. What? I had a bad feeling. About Ryan? He nodded. Why didn't you say anything? He sighed. Because feelings aren't proof. What gave you that feeling? Frank looked toward Daniel's headstone. The rehearsal dinner. I frowned. What happened? You were talking. I tried to remember. He kept interrupting you. I blinked. You'd start telling a story. Yes? He'd finish it. A chill ran through me. Frank continued. Then he'd look around to see who laughed. I had never noticed. I watched him all evening. Frank folded his arms. He wasn't paying attention to what people felt. He was paying attention to what people believed. Those words stayed with me for weeks. What people believed, not what was true. Not what was kind. Not what was right. Just what people believed. About a month later, my phone rang just after midnight. Every parent knows that sound. A late-night call. Your heart immediately prepares for disaster. I answered. Emily? She was crying. Not loudly. Quietly. Like someone trying not to be heard. Mom, I'm here. Silence. Then, I can't sleep. I sat upright. What's wrong? She stopped. I don't know. You can tell me anything. Another long silence. Finally, I think maybe I'm just emotional. No. What? You're calling your mother after midnight in tears. I swallowed hard. Something is wrong. She took a shaky breath. Then, I have to go. The line went dead. I called back immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. Again, voicemail. The next morning she texted, sorry, bad dream, a bad dream. I wanted to believe her. Instead, I saved the text. I don't know why. Just instinct. 2 weeks later, I ran into Emily completely by accident. At the grocery store. She looked startled to see me. Then genuinely happy. "Mom." She hugged me. Really hugged me. The kind of hug that says, "Don't let go yet." I smiled. What are the odds? We wandered the aisles together. For 20 wonderful minutes. It felt like old times. We argued over cereal brands, laughed about how expensive butter had become. She picked up my favorite tea without me asking. Then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and all the color drained from her face. "Everything, okay? It's Ryan. Is something wrong?" She immediately started unloading explanations. "He just wanted to know where I was. I'll be home soon. I forgot to tell him I stopped here." She wasn't talking to him. She was talking to me, trying to justify something that didn't need justifying. My heart broke a little more. "You don't have to explain buying groceries." She blinked, as if she'd never considered that. Just then, another woman approached us. Probably in her 60s. Gray hair. Bright smile. "Oh," she looked at Emily. "There you are." Emily smiled politely. "Hi." The woman turned to me. "You must be her mother." "I am." She laughed. "I've heard so much about you." Before I could answer, Emily's smile disappeared, almost imperceptibly. "What have you heard?" I asked gently. The woman chuckled. "Oh, just that you're wonderfully protective." I looked at Emily. She was frozen. Then the woman added something that made my blood run cold. "Ryan always jokes that if Emily doesn't answer your texts within 5 minutes, you'll probably send out a search party." She laughed. I didn't, because I'd never done that. Not once. It was a joke built on a lie. A harmless exaggeration, except it wasn't harmless. It was another brick. Another tiny story. Another version of me being built inside other people's minds. And I suddenly realized, Ryan wasn't just changing Emily's memories. He was manufacturing an entirely new mother. One that existed nowhere except in the stories he told. The frightening part? People believed him, because he never made the lies big enough to question. Only small enough to repeat. I smiled politely. Finished my shopping. Went home. Closed my front door. And for the first time in my life, I seriously considered doing something every mother swears she'll never do. Walking away. Because I was beginning to understand a painful truth. The harder I fought to stay close to Emily, the more evidence Ryan had that I was exactly what he'd been telling everyone I was. And I had no idea that the choice I was about to make would give him exactly what he wanted. At first. I didn't make the decision all at once. People imagine life-changing choices happen in one dramatic moment. They don't. They're usually made 100 tiny times. One unanswered text, one canceled lunch, one awkward phone call, one lonely birthday. Until one morning you wake up and realize you've already chosen. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hands. Emily's contact was pinned at the top of my favorites. It had been there for years. My thumb hovered over her name. I wanted to send what had become my usual message. Thinking about you. Hope you're having a good day. Instead, I locked the screen. That day, I didn't text. The next day, I didn't either. Then a week passed. Then 2. I kept waiting for my phone to ring. It didn't. That hurt more than I expected. Because I'd finally discovered something I'd been too afraid to test. If I stopped reaching, would she reach back? For the first month, the answer was no. People often ask why parents don't just let adult children live their lives. I wish it were that simple. Letting go isn't the hard part. Wondering whether your child thinks you let go because you stopped loving them? That's the part that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. Every night I argued with myself. Call her. No. She might think you don't care. She already thinks I'm too much. What if she needs you? Then she'll call. I repeated those last 4 words until they became a prayer. She'll call. Autumn became winter. For the first time in nearly 30 years, I decorated my Christmas tree alone without wondering what ornaments Emily would choose. I still hung the little paper angel she'd made in 2nd grade. The glitter had mostly fallen off. One wing was bent. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Some things stop being decorations. They become memories you can hold. About 3 months into my silence, my friend Susan invited me to dinner. She'd known me since high school. The kind of friend who tells you the truth even when it hurts. Halfway through our meal, she asked, "Have you heard from Emily?" "Not really." "What do you mean?" "A couple of texts." She studied me. "You're waiting," I sighed. "I am." Susan stirred her coffee. "You know what? Sometimes controlling people isolate someone by making them believe every relationship is exhausting." I looked at her. She continued carefully. "If Ryan has convinced Emily that you're emotionally demanding," I winced. "Then every time you try harder to stay connected, I'm proving him right." Susan nodded. Neither of us spoke for a long time, because sometimes the truth doesn't comfort you. It simply explains your pain. Christmas came. No invitation. No visit. Just a text at 9:42 that morning. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Love you." I stared at it. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Finally, I replied, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I love you too." Nothing else. That was the hardest message I'd ever sent. Not because of what it said, because of everything I left unsaid. I spent Christmas dinner at Frank's house. Daniel's brother had become one of the few people who understood. After dessert, he handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I found it while cleaning. Inside was a photograph. Daniel. Me. Little Emily sitting on his shoulders, laughing so hard her eyes were closed. The picture had been taken at the county fair 23 years earlier. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were 7 words. Never stop reminding her she's always home. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because I couldn't stop crying. January arrived, then February. Nearly 6 months had passed since I'd stopped chasing after my daughter. The silence had become strangely peaceful, not because it hurt less, because I'd stopped expecting it to end. I began volunteering at the local library, joined a gardening club, started taking watercolor classes. People assumed I was moving on. I wasn't. I was surviving. There's a difference. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. It wasn't Emily. It was Ryan. Alone. I opened the door, genuinely surprised. "Ryan?" He smiled. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "No." He held up a bakery box. I was nearby. Nearby. He lived almost 40 minutes away. I invited him inside. Looking back, I almost wish I hadn't. He complimented my garden, asked about my volunteer work, talked about the weather. For nearly 20 minutes, it was harmless conversation. Then, he leaned forward. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For giving Emily space." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "She seems happier." I didn't answer. He smiled politely. I know it wasn't easy. Still, I said nothing. Then came the sentence I'll never forget. "I think she finally feels like she can breathe." It felt as though someone had slapped me. Not because I believed him, because I realized he'd come all that way to make sure I heard those words. This wasn't a visit. It was a message. A victory lap. I looked him straight in the eyes. "Did Emily ask you to tell me that?" For the first time since I'd known him, his smile flickered. Just for a second. "No, I didn't think so." He stood, smoothed his jacket. "I really do appreciate everything you've done." Then he left. The moment the door closed, I sank into my chair. Something inside me finally settled. Not in a good way. In a permanent way. Because I knew, without a doubt, Ryan wanted me gone. Not merely distant. Gone. And people don't usually work that hard unless someone else's presence threatens something. The question was, what? The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks later, I was grocery shopping when someone called my name. I turned. It was Carla, Ryan's coworker, the woman from the barbecue. She looked nervous. Can we talk? I frowned. Of course. She glanced around. Somewhere private? We sat in the cafe inside the grocery store. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. I've been thinking about something for months. I waited. I shouldn't have repeated what Ryan said about you. I smiled gently. It's all right. No. She shook her head. It's not. There was genuine guilt in her eyes. I believed him. What changed? She looked down. I met Emily. I blinked. Outside of work. And? Carla swallowed. She kept apologizing. My heart sank. For everything. The waitress brought our coffees. Neither of us touched them. Carla continued. If she dropped her fork, I'm sorry. If she took too long ordering, I'm sorry. If Ryan interrupted her. She apologized. For him, I closed my eyes. Because I knew that version of my daughter. I'd seen glimpses of her. Carla leaned closer. That's not normal. No, it isn't. Then she said something that made my pulse race. I overheard Ryan one day. What do you mean? He didn't know I was nearby. What did he say? He was talking to another guy from work. She hesitated. I don't remember every word. What do you remember? Her voice became barely above a whisper. He said, she took a deep breath. Once you get her away from her mother, everything gets easier. For a second, the world simply stopped. I couldn't hear the grocery carts. Couldn't hear the espresso machine. Couldn't hear people talking. Just those words. Once you get her away from her mother. Not because I was controlling. Not because I was interfering. Because I was an obstacle. To what? I still didn't know. But now I knew one thing for certain. The distance between me and Emily hadn't happened naturally. It had been engineered. Patiently. Carefully. Deliberately. Carla reached into her purse. I've gone back and forth about giving you this. She slid a folded business card across the table. It wasn't a business card. It was a receipt. On the back, someone had written a phone number. Who's this? The woman Ryan keeps having lunch with. I stared at the number. How do you know? Because Carla looked ashamed. I finally asked around. Silence. Then she added quietly, she's not a client. My fingers tightened around the paper. Who is she? Carla met my eyes. I think she's been his girlfriend for almost a year. A year. Almost exactly as long as Emily had been drifting away from me. The timeline fit together so perfectly it made me feel sick. Ryan hadn't just isolated my daughter. He'd created enough emotional distance that she had no one left to compare notes with. No mother. No close friends. No outside voice asking difficult questions. Just him. And whatever story he chose to tell next. I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into my purse. I had evidence now. Not proof. Not yet. But enough to know I wasn't imagining things. Enough to know the worst chapter of our family story hadn't even begun. I carried that receipt around in my purse for nearly 3 weeks. Not because I didn't know what to do. Because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to call the number. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to tell Emily everything. I wanted to drive straight to Ryan's office and ask him one simple question. Why? Why isolate my daughter? Why convince her the one person who had loved her unconditionally was somehow a burden? Why spend years dismantling a relationship that existed long before you came along? But every time I imagined confronting him, I heard Susan's voice. The moment he knows you're onto him, he'll change the story. She was right. People like Ryan didn't survive because they told convincing lies. They survived because they always told them first. I couldn't afford to make the first move. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. For years, I'd been looking at Ryan as a son-in-law. Now I looked at him as someone hiding something. It's amazing what you notice when you stop accepting every explanation at face value. One Saturday afternoon, Frank called me. You busy? Not really. Want to help me clean out Daniel's old storage unit? I hadn't thought about that storage unit in years. Daniel rented it when Emily was little. Mostly tools, fishing equipment, boxes of holiday decorations. After he died, I couldn't bear to go through everything. I kept paying the monthly fee out of habit. Frank had finally convinced me it was time. The unit smelled like dust and old cardboard. We spent hours sorting through boxes. Old camping gear, baby clothes, family photo albums. Then Frank pulled out a battered metal toolbox. "Remember this?" I smiled. Daniel never let anyone touch it. Inside were wrenches, screws, tape measures, and a small leather notebook. I'd never seen it before. Frank handed it to me. Inside, Daniel had written random observations. Not a diary, just thoughts, ideas, lists. One page caught my eye. It was titled, "Things I Hope Emily Never Forgets." I felt tears forming before I even started reading. The list was simple. Your worth isn't decided by anyone else's opinion. If someone makes you smaller to make themselves feel bigger, walk away. Love should feel safe. Then, the last line. Anyone who asks you to choose between people who truly love you doesn't understand love. I closed the notebook. My hands were shaking. Daniel had written those words almost 20 years before Ryan entered our lives. Yet somehow, it felt like he'd left us a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m, I took the notebook back out. I read those lines again and again. Then I had an idea. Not a plan. Just an idea. I photographed the page. I didn't send it to Emily. Not yet. I simply saved it. Something told me she'd need to see her father's words one day. Just not until she was ready to believe them. A week later, I got another unexpected visitor. This time, it was Emily. She stood on my porch carrying a casserole dish. I made too much lasagna. I almost laughed. The excuse was terrible. She'd never made lasagna from scratch in her life. I hugged her. She hugged me back. For a moment, everything felt normal. We spent the afternoon baking cookies, just like we used to. Neither of us mentioned Ryan. Sometimes silence is a kindness. About halfway through rolling dough, Emily suddenly said, "I forgot how peaceful it is here." I looked up. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I don't know." Then she smiled sadly. I can hear myself think. Those words stayed with me, because she hadn't realized what she'd admitted. Later, while the cookies cooled, I made tea. When I returned, Emily was standing in front of our old family photos. One picture in particular held her attention, Daniel holding her bicycle while she learned to ride. She whispered, "I miss him." "I do too." She wiped her eyes. "I keep trying to remember his voice." I walked over beside her. "You never really lose someone's voice." She looked at me. "You just forget where to listen." Then her phone rang. Ryan. Her entire body changed. Again, like someone had tightened invisible strings around her shoulders. She answered immediately. "Hi." Pause. "No, I'm still here." Another pause. We lost track of time. She looked at the clock. "I'll leave now." Another pause. "I'm sorry." After she hung up, she immediately started gathering her purse. "I have to go. You've only been here 3 hours. I know. You don't have to rush." She looked guilty. "I do." There it was again. Not fear exactly. Obligation. The kind that slowly convinces someone every minute away is a debt they have to repay. Before she left, I handed her a container of cookies. Ryan's favorite. She looked surprised. "You still remember?" "I remember everything." She smiled. But this time, the smile looked painful. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" A woman answered. "Is this Margaret Harper?" "Yes." "My name is Angela." My pulse quickened. Angela, the name on the receipt. "I'm sorry for calling." I said nothing. I wasn't sure if I should. Still nothing. Then, "I think we need to talk about Ryan." Every instinct screamed at me to ask 100 questions. Instead, I quietly replied, "I'm listening." Angela sighed. "I didn't know he was married." The room spun. "What?" "He told me he was divorced." I closed my eyes. He said his ex-wife's family was overbearing. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. He hadn't just rewritten me for Emily. He'd rewritten Emily for someone else. Angela continued. We've been seeing each other for about 10 months. 10 months. Almost the exact length of my silence. She sounded devastated. I found your number by accident. How? I finally searched him online. My stomach dropped. He doesn't have social media. No, she hesitated. But one of his coworkers tagged him in a charity event. And I saw pictures. She started crying. With your daughter. I sat there in complete silence. Sometimes people expect shouting, anger, drama. Instead, there was only heartbreak. Not just mine. Hers too. I ended it immediately, Angela whispered. I told him never to contact me again. I believed her. There was genuine shame in her voice. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. He laughed. Laughed? He said I'd calm down. I clenched the phone tighter. He told me every woman in his life eventually forgives him. Angela asked if we could meet. I agreed. The following afternoon, at a quiet cafe across town. When she walked in, she looked nothing like I'd imagined. Not glamorous, not manipulative, just heartbroken. She looked about 35, professional, kind eyes. The kind of woman who'd clearly spent the last week replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Ryan. She sat down. I'm so sorry. I nodded. I know. She opened a folder. I brought everything. Everything? She slowly spread photographs across the table. Restaurant receipts, hotel reservations, birthday cards, selfies, text message screenshots. There was no denying it. Ryan hadn't been having an affair. He'd been living two lives. Then Angela slid one final item toward me. I almost threw this away. It was a handwritten note, Ryan's handwriting. At the bottom, he'd signed, "Love always." But it wasn't the signature that caught my attention. It was one sentence in the middle. The only reason my marriage hasn't ended yet is because I have to untangle my wife's mother from our lives first. I stopped breathing. Read it again. Then again. Not because I couldn't understand it, because I could. Perfectly. I wasn't collateral damage. I wasn't an inconvenience. I wasn't too much. I had been part of his plan from the beginning. Removing me wasn't about creating boundaries. It was about eliminating the one person most likely to notice who he really was. And suddenly, every piece of the puzzle snapped into place. The jokes, the criticism, the little lies, the carefully planted stories, the isolation, the guilt, the distance. It had never been random. It had all been preparation. Preparation for the day when Emily would have no one left to trust except him. I looked up at Angela. She was crying quietly. So, I whispered, "What do we do now?" Angela took a slow breath. Then she said 6 words that would change everything. "I don't think we're his only victims." Angela's words hung between us. "I don't think we're his only victims." I looked at her, unsure what to say. "You mean other women?" She slowly nodded. "I've been trying to make sense of everything." She opened another folder she'd brought with her. This wasn't planned. She gave a sad laugh. I only started putting the pieces together after I broke things off. She slid 3 printed screenshots across the table. Each one was from a different social media account. Different women. Different years. Different cities. But every caption was eerily similar. Starting over with someone who finally understands me. Leaving toxic people behind. Peace feels different when drama is gone. At first glance, they meant nothing. Then Angela pointed to a familiar face. Ryan. Always Ryan. Standing beside a different woman in each photo. Not romantically, just close enough to suggest a relationship. My stomach twisted. Who are they? I don't know all of them. She took a breath. But I reached one. The woman was named Melissa. Angela had spoken with her the night before. Melissa and Ryan had dated briefly several years before he met Emily. The relationship lasted less than a year. But according to Melissa, the pattern was identical. At first, Ryan adored her family. He brought flowers to her mother, helped her father fix things around the house, never missed birthdays. Then, little by little, he began making comments. Your sister is kind of controlling, isn't she? Your dad can be intimidating. I think your mom depends on you too much. Nothing explosive. Just enough to make Melissa start noticing flaws she'd never cared about before. Angela looked me in the eye. Melissa said something I can't stop thinking about. What? She said. Angela glanced down at her notes. Ryan never asked me to stop loving my family. I frowned. He just convinced me they loved me the wrong way. Those words hit me harder than anything else I'd heard, because that was exactly what had happened to Emily. Ryan never told her to abandon me. He simply redefined every act of love as control. Checking in became hovering. Advice became interference. Concern became guilt. Affection became obligation. Until eventually, Emily thought creating distance was healthy. Not because she'd stopped loving me, because she'd been taught that loving me too much was somehow unhealthy. I drove home in silence. That evening, I sat in Daniel's old recliner and stared at the family photographs lining the mantel. There was Emily at 5, missing her front teeth. Emily at 12, proudly holding up a science fair ribbon. Emily on her college graduation day, wearing Daniel's old wristwatch because she said it made her feel like he was there. I whispered into the empty room. You didn't stop loving me. The tears finally came. Because for the first time in over a year, I truly believed that. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. It was Emily, not a text. A phone call. I answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. She sounded distracted. Mom, have you talked to anyone from Ryan's work lately? My heart skipped. No, a lie. The first lie I'd ever told my daughter. It tasted awful. Oh, she hesitated. I just wondered, is everything okay? Another long pause. I think so. Think. Not know. Think. Then she said something that sent a chill through me. Ryan keeps asking strange questions. What kind of questions? He asks if anyone's been calling me. I stayed silent. He asked if I'd heard any rumors. My pulse quickened. He asked if anyone seemed jealous of us. Ryan knew. Not everything, but enough. Somehow, he had sensed that the story he'd spent years controlling was beginning to slip out of his hands. That afternoon, Angela called. He contacted me. What? He showed up at my apartment. My chest tightened. Are you okay? Yes. He apologized. I almost laughed. Not because apologies are funny, because I knew Ryan well enough now to know an apology from him was never really an apology. What did he say? He said. She took a shaky breath. People are trying to turn you against me. Of course. Always the victim. Always someone else's fault. Then Angela added, he also asked if I'd spoken to an older woman. I closed my eyes. He knows. He doesn't know who, but he knows. For the next several days, I expected something dramatic. An angry phone call. A confrontation. Nothing happened. The silence felt worse. Because it meant Ryan was thinking. Planning. Rewriting. People like him hated losing control. And when they felt it slipping, they usually became even more dangerous. Not necessarily violent. More calculated. Exactly 1 week later, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mrs. Harper. The handwriting was Ryan's. For a moment, I wondered if it was another attempt to manipulate me. I unfolded it carefully. The first line read, I think we both want what's best for Emily. I nearly threw it away. Instead, I kept reading. He thanked me for respecting boundaries. He said Emily was finally growing into her own person. He even complimented me for giving her space. It sounded reasonable, calm, almost thoughtful, until the last paragraph. Sometimes parents don't realize that holding on too tightly only pushes children away. I hope one day you can forgive yourself for that. There it was, The knife hidden inside the velvet. The entire letter had one purpose: to make me doubt myself. Again. But this time, it didn't work. I folded it neatly, placed it beside Angela's evidence. For the first time, I could see his pattern clearly enough that his words no longer had power. A few evenings later, Frank came over for dinner. I finally told him everything. The affair. Angela. The note. The years of manipulation. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. What does Emily know? Not enough. What does she believe? I stared at my plate. I don't know anymore. Frank nodded slowly. Then don't fight, Ryan. I looked up. What? Fight for Emily's ability to see. I don't understand. If you attack him before she's ready. He sighed. She'll spend all her energy defending him. He was right. Again. Everyone around me seemed to understand something I had only just begun to learn. You cannot rescue someone by forcing them to see. They have to notice the cracks themselves. Your job is simply to leave a light on. That night, before bed, I opened my phone. For months, I had resisted texting Emily. Now, I typed just one sentence. I'm always here. No explanations needed. Nothing else. No mention of Ryan. No accusations. No questions. I pressed send. She didn't reply that night, or the next day, or the day after. On the fourth morning, a message finally appeared. Thank you. 2 words. That was all. But unlike every message before, there was no forced cheerfulness, no excuses, no hurry. Just, thank you. For reasons I couldn't explain, it felt like the first honest conversation we'd had in over a year. I didn't know it then. But somewhere inside Ryan's carefully built world, the foundation had begun to crack. Because manipulation only works as long as the victim believes every uncomfortable feeling is their own fault. The moment someone starts asking, what if I'm not the problem? Everything changes. I had no idea Emily had started asking herself that very question. And I certainly didn't know that. Only days later, she would discover something hidden inside Ryan's home office that would make every lie he'd ever told impossible to deny. It wasn't another phone. It wasn't another woman. It was something far more disturbing, something Ryan had never intended anyone to find. There are moments in life that split your world into 2 versions: the life before you knew, and the life after. For Emily, that moment happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. She wasn't looking for secrets. She was looking for printer paper. Ryan had converted the spare bedroom into a home office shortly after they married. He rarely let anyone inside, not because he forbade it. He simply made it feel like his space. If you need anything, he'd always say, just ask me. Emily never questioned it. Why would she? Married couples have private workspaces all the time. That afternoon, Ryan texted her. Can you print the insurance form I emailed? She walked into the office, opened the printer cabinet. No paper. She searched the drawers. Nothing. Finally, she pulled open the bottom filing cabinet. The first drawer held office supplies. Pens. Folders. Staples. The second drawer was locked. She frowned. She'd never noticed that before. The key was still in the lock. Ryan had forgotten to remove it. She hesitated, then turned it. The drawer clicked open. Inside were several neatly organized folders. Taxes, bank statements, insurance, nothing unusual. Then she noticed a plain black notebook tucked beneath a stack of files. No label, no title, just black leather. Curiosity got the better of her. She opened it. The first page was blank. The second page wasn't. Across the top, in Ryan's handwriting, were 5 words. Relationship adjustment notes. Emily frowned. She flipped the page. Underneath were dated entries, not journal entries. Lists. Bullet points. Observations. Strategies. At first, they didn't make sense. Then she reached one that froze her in place. Emily. Responds well to reassurance after conflict. Avoid prolonged silence. Makes her anxious. More compliant after apologizing. Avoid direct criticism in front of others. Mother's influence strongest after visits. Emily stopped breathing. She kept reading. Another page. Phase 2. Reduce weekend visits. Encourage couple traditions. Normalize delayed replies to mother. Reframe constant contact as emotional dependence. Her knees went weak. She sank into Ryan's office chair. No. This couldn't be real. She turned another page. There, written in blue ink, was a sentence she recognized immediately. Your mom means well, but she doesn't realize how hard it is for us to build our own life. Ryan had said those exact words to her 2 years earlier. Only now, beneath the sentence he'd written, worked well. Less guilt after declining visits. Emily felt physically sick. She wasn't reading memories. She was reading experiments. The pages continued, each one colder than the last. Not emotional. Clinical. As if her life had been a project. One section was labeled communication. Never forbid contact. Suggest balance instead. Let her think distance is her idea. Praise independence immediately afterward. Emily's hands began shaking. She remembered every conversation. Every time Ryan had smiled and said, "I'm not telling you what to do." He hadn't needed to. He'd simply nudged her until she'd done exactly what he wanted, and she'd thanked him for respecting her choices. Then she found a page with one word written across the top. Margaret. Her mother's name. Her heart dropped. The notes were even more detailed. Never criticize directly. Use concern instead. Others must reach conclusions themselves. Repeat, she means well. Reinforce boundary language. Reduce unplanned visits. Delay responses after she contacts Emily. Let silence create a new normal. Emily covered her mouth. She remembered every delayed text, every canceled lunch, every guilty feeling. She had believed they were her own decisions. Now, she wasn't sure any of them had been. She turned another page. This one had a title. Long-term goal. The sentence underneath made the room spin. Primary emotional dependence must remain inside the marriage. Nothing else. Just that. Ryan hadn't wanted a healthy marriage. He'd wanted to become her entire world. Emily sat frozen for several minutes. Then, she noticed a folded envelope tucked into the back cover. Her name was written across the front, not in Ryan's handwriting, in her father's, Daniel. She stared at it. How could that be? She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter she'd never seen. Her father had written it shortly before he died. He'd left it with me years ago, asking me to give it to Emily if she ever truly needed it. I had hidden it in our family safe. I had no idea Ryan had somehow gotten hold of a photocopy. Across the top, in Ryan's handwriting, someone had scribbled, "Do not give until emotionally safe." Emily unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Her father's words were simple. "Sweetheart, if you're reading this someday, remember something your mother and I always tried to teach you. Anyone who truly loves you will never ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. Protect your kindness, but never mistake control for love." A tear landed on the page. Then another. Ryan hadn't destroyed the letter. He had hidden it, because he knew exactly what it said. And he knew that if Emily read those words too soon, his carefully built world might collapse. She looked around the office. Suddenly, every bookshelf, every framed certificate, every smiling photograph felt like part of a stage set. The man she'd trusted more than anyone wasn't simply unfaithful. He had been studying her, managing her, recording her. For years. At that exact moment, the garage door began to rumble open. Ryan was home. Emily looked down at the notebook still open in her lap, then toward the office door. She had less than 30 seconds to decide. Put the notebook back and pretend she'd seen nothing. Or take it and risk everything. She chose in 3 seconds. She slipped the notebook into her tote bag, locked the drawer exactly as she'd found it, walked calmly into the kitchen, and greeted her husband with a smile he completely believed. For the first time in 3 years, Emily was the one pretending. "I didn't know any of this while it was happening. I only learned what Emily had gone through after she finally came home. Months later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Sometimes she'd stop talking for several minutes. Not because she'd forgotten, because remembering hurt. She looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, the hardest part wasn't realizing Ryan lied to me." She stared into her tea. "It was realizing how many of my own thoughts weren't actually mine." The afternoon she found the notebook, she somehow managed to smile through dinner. Ryan talked about work. She nodded. He joked about one of his coworkers. She laughed. He kissed her forehead before bed. She almost flinched. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Ryan was always watching. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every page she'd read. More compliant after apologizing. The words echoed in her mind. She started replaying hundreds of memories. How many apologies had she made that weren't necessary? How many opinions had she quietly abandoned? How many friendships had slowly disappeared because Ryan had called them draining? She counted them. Her college roommate, her book club, a cousin she'd once spoken to every week, her coworker, Lisa, even me, one by one. Her world had become smaller, and Ryan had always been standing at the center of what remained. The next morning, Emily did something Ryan never expected. She apologized, not because she'd done anything wrong, because she wanted him to believe nothing had changed. "I've been distracted lately," she told him over breakfast. "I'm sorry." Ryan smiled, reached across the table, took her hand. "It's okay," exactly as he'd written in the notebook. Responds well to reassurance after conflict. She felt sick. She was living inside his script. After he left for work, she took the notebook to her car. She drove to a park across town, sat beneath an old oak tree, read every page, slowly. This time, she noticed something she'd missed before: the dates. The notebook wasn't written all at once. It had been updated regularly, for years, every few weeks, every few months. Sometimes after family gatherings, sometimes after holidays, sometimes after arguments. One page made her cry. It was dated the day after my birthday. Under the heading Margaret, Ryan had written, "Forgot birthday. No reminder given." Distance increasing naturally. Naturally. He'd watched her forget my birthday. He could have reminded her. Instead, he'd written about it like a successful business strategy. Emily said that was the moment she stopped trying to defend him in her own mind. She began quietly gathering information. Not because she wanted revenge, because she no longer trusted her own memory. She photographed every page of the notebook, then returned it to the locked drawer before Ryan came home. She copied financial records, insurance documents, bank statements. Then something strange caught her attention. There was a checking account she didn't recognize. Not hidden, just unfamiliar. She assumed it belonged to Ryan's business, until she saw monthly payments to a luxury apartment complex 25 minutes away. Her stomach dropped. That evening, she casually mentioned apartments. "Did you hear they're building new condos downtown?" Ryan barely looked up from his laptop. "No, I wonder if they'll be expensive," he shrugged. "Probably. Not even a flicker. No hesitation. Nothing." Emily realized something terrifying. Lying had become effortless for him. The following Friday, she called in sick to work. Ryan thought she was at the office. Instead, she drove to the apartment complex listed on the bank statement. She parked across the street. Waited. An hour passed. Nothing. She almost left. Then, Ryan's truck pulled into the parking garage. He wasn't alone. Angela climbed out of the passenger seat. Emily watched them laugh together. Ryan reached for her hand, just as he'd once reached for Emily's. They disappeared into the building. Emily sat frozen behind the steering wheel. She expected rage. Instead, she felt strangely calm, almost relieved. Because for the first time in years, reality matched the feelings she'd been trying to ignore. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't too sensitive. She wasn't imagining things. She didn't confront him. Not then. She drove home, walked inside, fed the dog, folded laundry, made dinner. Ryan arrived 2 hours later carrying flowers, yellow roses. "My beautiful wife." Emily smiled. "Thank you." Later, she told me, "That was the first time I realized flowers can feel frightening. Because they weren't love. They were camouflage." Over the next 2 weeks, Emily quietly prepared. She opened a new bank account in her own name. She gathered her passport, birth certificate, social security card, old family photographs, the little stuffed rabbit I'd given her when she was born. Ryan never noticed, because he never imagined she'd leave. Control creates confidence. Sometimes, too much confidence. Then something happened that neither of us expected. Frank called Emily directly. He hadn't spoken to her in months. "Hi, kiddo. Uncle Frank. I found something that belonged to your dad." Her voice caught. "What is it?" "I'd rather give it to you in person." She almost said no. Ryan hated last-minute plans. Instead, she surprised herself. "I'll come tomorrow." When Emily arrived at Frank's house, he handed her the leather notebook we'd found in Daniel's storage unit. She sat quietly reading her father's handwritten thoughts. Then she reached the page titled, "Things I Hope Emily Never Forgets." She read the final line 3 times. "Anyone who asks you to choose between people who truly love you doesn't understand love." She broke down. Frank didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside her. After nearly 10 minutes, Emily whispered, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." Frank looked at her gently. "You married him?" She nodded. "No." He shook his head. The mistake wasn't marrying him. She looked confused. "The mistake would be staying after you've learned who he is." That sentence changed something inside her. For months, she'd believed leaving meant failing. Now, she began wondering if staying was the real failure. That evening, Ryan noticed she was quieter than usual. "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, long enough to make her wonder if he somehow knew. Then he smiled. "You work too hard." She almost laughed. No. She'd spent years working to become the version of herself he wanted. She was simply too exhausted to keep pretending. 3 nights later, Emily woke around 2 in the morning. Ryan wasn't in bed. She heard his voice downstairs. Soft, careful. She walked halfway down the stairs. Couldn't see him. Only hear him. She doesn't suspect anything. A pause. Another voice. "Angela." On speakerphone. Ryan laughed quietly. "I told you." Another pause. "I'll deal with my wife." Emily stopped breathing. She leaned closer. Ryan continued. "Once the divorce is finished, none of this will matter." Divorce? He hadn't even told her he wanted one. He was planning a future she'd never been invited into. Then came the sentence that shattered whatever hope she still had. "I've already isolated her from everyone who would make this difficult." Emily gripped the staircase railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't listening to a husband. She was listening to a man discussing a completed project, and she realized something chilling. Ryan still believed Angela was on his side. He had no idea Angela had already told me everything. Which meant, for the first time since this nightmare began, Ryan was the only person in the story who didn't know the truth. He thought he was 5 moves ahead. He didn't realize the entire board had already changed. And by the end of the following week, the man who spent years controlling every conversation was about to lose control of the only one that mattered. Everything I know about the next few days, I know because Emily eventually told me. Sometimes she'd tell a piece. Stop. Cry. Then pick up the story again the next morning. Healing isn't linear. Neither was her story. After hearing Ryan's late-night phone call, Emily didn't sleep. She lay beside him, staring into the darkness. The man sleeping inches away from her had just calmly explained how he'd isolated her from everyone she loved. He wasn't angry. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't out of control. He was proud. That realization frightened her more than anything else, because it meant the cruelty wasn't accidental. It was intentional. The following morning, Ryan kissed her goodbye before work. "Love you. Emily smiled. Love you too. She waited until his truck disappeared around the corner. Then she locked every door, sat at the kitchen table, and cried harder than she ever had in her adult life. Not because her marriage was ending, because her reality was. She later told me something that broke my heart. Mom, I wasn't just grieving Ryan. She wiped her eyes. I was grieving the version of myself I thought I was. By noon, she had made her decision. She wasn't confronting Ryan alone. Not anymore. She called Frank. Can you meet me? Of course. An hour later, they sat in his pickup truck parked behind a quiet diner. Emily handed him the notebook. He read every page. When he finished, he closed it carefully. I wish your father were here. So do I. He'd tell you the same thing I'm about to. She looked at him. You don't owe someone endless chances when they've spent years treating your love like a weakness. Frank drove her to my house. Not because she was ready to see me, because she wanted to. 3 different times, she reached for the door handle. 3 different times, she couldn't move. I don't know how to face her. Frank looked at her gently. You tell the truth. I ignored her. You were manipulated. I chose him. You were deceived. I believed terrible things about my own mother. Frank's voice softened. You believed someone who spent years teaching you what to believe. Emily broke down again. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She asked Frank to drive away. Later, she told me. That was the closest I came to coming home before I actually did. That evening, Ryan noticed she'd barely spoken all day. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You've seemed distant lately. The irony almost made her laugh. I've just been tired. He smiled. We should take a vacation. A vacation. Emily realized something. Whenever she started asking questions, Ryan suggested a distraction. A trip. A gift. A fancy dinner. Never a conversation. Never an answer. Always an escape. The next day, she met Angela. For the first time, they chose a small coffee shop nearly 40 minutes away. When Angela walked in, both women froze. Neither looked angry. Neither looked jealous. They simply looked heartbroken. Angela spoke first. I'm sorry. Emily shook her head. So am I. They sat together for almost 3 hours, comparing dates, messages, photographs, promises. It became painfully obvious that Ryan had often left one woman to spend time with the other. The flowers he'd brought Emily? He'd bought them after having lunch with Angela. The weekend conference? He'd spent it at the apartment. The anniversary dinner he'd canceled because of work? He'd celebrated Angela's birthday. Lie after lie. Month after month. Year after year. Then Angela showed Emily the handwritten note. The only reason my marriage hasn't ended yet is because I have to untangle my wife's mother from our lives first. Emily stared at the sentence, read it again, then whispered, My mother wasn't the problem. Angela reached across the table. No. Emily started crying. She was protecting me. That was the moment. Not when she found the affair. Not when she found the notebook. Not even when she overheard Ryan. This was the moment everything changed. Because she suddenly remembered something she'd buried deep inside herself. When she was 12 years old, she'd fallen off her bicycle. She'd insisted she was fine. I had carried her into the emergency room anyway. She'd been furious. The X-ray showed a fractured wrist. She laughed through her tears as she told me, You always saw what I couldn't. And for 3 years, Ryan had convinced her that was a flaw. When in reality, it had always been love. Emily went home one final time. Not to stay. To pack. She waited until Ryan left for work the next morning. She filled 2 suitcases, family photographs, her father's watch, the stuffed rabbit, a few clothes. Nothing more. Material things suddenly felt meaningless. As she walked through the living room, she stopped. There, hanging above the fireplace, was their wedding photograph. Ryan smiling. Emily smiling. Everyone applauding. She stepped closer, removed the frame from the wall, opened the back, took out only one thing, Her mother's handwritten note tucked behind the picture. I'd slipped it there the night before her wedding. It read, "Marriage should never cost you the people who loved you before it began." She had forgotten it was there. Ryan hadn't. The corner had been unfolded. He had read it. He'd put it back. He'd known from the very beginning exactly what I feared. She placed the note inside her purse, closed the front door, left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and walked away. She never looked back. Around 6 that evening, Ryan came home to an empty house. He called Emily. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Then he called Frank. No answer. Angela. Blocked. Finally, he called me. I watched his name appear on my phone. For almost a minute, I let it ring. Then it stopped. He called again. This time, I answered. Margaret. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Have you heard from Emily?" I looked through my living room window. Rain was beginning to fall. "No." Another pause. "If she contacts you, I'll make sure she's safe." His breathing changed, just slightly. Then he said, "I think someone has been filling her head with lies." I replied with the only sentence I had wanted to say for years. "No, Ryan." Silence. She finally found the truth. I ended the call. Exactly 43 minutes later, someone knocked on my front door. 3 soft knocks. The same way Emily had always knocked since she was a little girl. I opened it. There she stood. 1 suitcase. 1 backpack. No wedding ring. Mascara streaked from crying. A bruise, faded yellow now, still visible beneath her sleeve. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered the words you heard at the beginning of this story. "I finally know why you stopped fighting for me." I shook my head. "No." She looked confused. "I never stopped." Her lip trembled. I just finally understood. I stepped forward, took her face in both of my hands. The same way I had when she was a little girl with scraped knees. "You were never too much to love." She burst into tears. "I believed him. I know. I'm so sorry. I know. I thought you were trying to control me. I know." She collapsed into my arms, and for the first time in over a year, my daughter came home. Not because I had rescued her, because she had finally rescued herself. But our story wasn't over, because Ryan wasn't finished. The next morning, he would show up at my front door with the police, claiming Emily had stolen thousands of dollars from him. It would be the last lie he ever told us. That night, neither of us slept. Emily stayed in her old bedroom. The room I'd never turned into an office, never rented out, never repainted. People used to tell me I should. She's married now. Move on. I couldn't explain why I never touched it. Now, I think some part of me always believed she'd need to come home. I just prayed it wouldn't be because her heart had been broken. Around 6 the next morning, there was a knock at the front door. Firm. 3 quick knocks. Not Emily's. Not Frank's. I already knew who it was. I opened the door. Ryan stood on my porch. 2 police officers stood behind him. He looked exhausted, but not devastated. Calculated. He pointed toward the house. "My wife is inside." One of the officers nodded politely. "Ma'am, Mr. Carter says his wife left with cash and financial documents belonging to him." I looked directly at Ryan. "You called the police? I just want my property back." Property. Not wife. Property. Emily stepped into the hallway. She looked pale, but calm. One officer greeted her. "Ma'am, your husband says you removed documents from the residence." Emily answered quietly. "I copied documents." "Did you take money?" "No." "Did you take anything that wasn't jointly owned?" "No." Ryan interrupted. "She's lying." The older officer held up a hand. "Sir?" Ryan fell silent. Emily disappeared upstairs for a moment. When she came back, she wasn't carrying clothes or jewelry. She was carrying the black notebook. She handed it to the officer. "I'd like you to read the first 3 pages." Ryan's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. For the first time, he looked afraid. The officer opened the notebook. read silently, then looked at Ryan. What exactly is this? Ryan forced a laugh. Personal notes. The officer kept reading. His expression hardened. He turned another page, then another. He closed the notebook, handed it back to Emily. This appears to be a civil matter, Ryan protested. But if she copied financial records connected to a marriage, he shrugged. That's not theft. Then he looked Ryan squarely in the eyes. And I strongly suggest you stop making accusations you can't support. The officers left. Ryan and I stood in silence for several long seconds. Finally, he looked at me. This is your fault, I smiled. Not cruelly, just sadly. No. I stepped aside so Emily could stand next to me. This is yours. Ryan looked at Emily. His voice softened immediately. The performance began. Babe, she didn't answer. I know you're upset. Silence. I can explain. Still nothing. I've made mistakes. Emily finally spoke. No. Ryan blinked. No. You made plans. He frowned. I don't understand. I read the notebook. Every ounce of color drained from his face. You invaded my privacy. Emily laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound someone makes when the last illusion dies. My privacy? She shook her head. You spent years documenting how to manipulate me. He immediately changed tactics. You misunderstood. No, I was trying to help us. No. You took everything out of context. No. 3 years earlier. Those excuses would have worked. Today, they sounded empty. Then Emily reached into her purse. She pulled out my wedding note, the one Ryan had secretly read years before. She unfolded it carefully. Read it aloud. Marriage should never cost you the people who loved you before it began. She looked directly at him. You knew. Ryan said nothing. You knew exactly what my mother feared. Still nothing. And instead of proving her wrong, her voice cracked. You spent 3 years proving her right. He tried one last time. He stepped toward her. I'm the only person who truly understands you. Emily took one step backward. No. Then another. I don't even think you know who I am. Ryan looked at me, almost pleading. Say something. I had imagined this moment for years. I thought I'd scream. Call him names. Tell him everything I'd been holding inside. Instead, I spoke as calmly as I ever had. You spent years convincing my daughter that my love was a burden. He stared. I'll never forgive that. I closed the door. Gently. Not dramatically. Just closed it. That was the last time I ever saw Ryan in person. The divorce took nearly 11 months. It wasn't easy. Ryan contested everything. The house. Savings. Furniture. Even the dog. Then his own notebook became evidence. Not because writing manipulative thoughts is illegal, but because it destroyed his credibility. Every explanation he'd offered suddenly looked different. Every denial, every accusation, every carefully crafted story. Even his own attorney reportedly asked him why he'd kept such detailed records. He had no answer. Angela testified about the affair. Carla testified about conversations at work. Melissa submitted a sworn statement describing the same pattern she'd experienced years earlier. For the first time in his life, Ryan couldn't control the narrative because too many people were finally telling the truth at once. Months later, Emily received the final divorce decree. She didn't celebrate. She simply exhaled, as though she'd been holding her breath for years. Healing wasn't quick. It wasn't cinematic. There wasn't one magical conversation that erased everything. There were awkward mornings, unexpected tears, guilt, so much guilt. Sometimes Emily would apologize for things she'd done years earlier. I should have answered your calls. You don't have to apologize. I missed your birthday. I know. I believed him. I know. I hurt you. I would always give her the same answer. You came home. Because in the end, that was the only part that mattered. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce, we visited Daniel's grave together. The first time since everything had happened. Emily knelt beside the headstone, placed fresh lilies against the stone, then smiled through her tears. "Dad," she whispered. I finally listened. The wind moved softly through the trees. I looked at the notebook we'd found in Daniel's storage unit. The page had become worn from being read so many times. Emily traced the last sentence with her finger. "Anyone who asks you to choose between people who truly love you doesn't understand love." She looked up at me. "I almost lost you." I reached for her hand. "No," she frowned. "No, you lost your way." I squeezed her hand gently. "But you never lost me." People sometimes ask whether I hate Ryan. I don't. Hatred is exhausting. I've already lost enough years to someone who wanted control over our lives. I won't give him another minute by letting bitterness live inside me. Do I think about him? Rarely. Do I wonder whether he changed? That's no longer my concern. Some lessons belong to the people who refuse to learn them. Emily still calls me almost every evening. Not because she has to, because she wants to. Sometimes we talk for an hour, sometimes 5 minutes. Sometimes we sit on video calls drinking tea without saying much at all. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels safe. And every once in a while, she'll stop in the middle of a conversation and laugh. "What?" I'll ask. She'll smile and say, "I can hear myself again." Every single time, I silently thank God that she can. Because that's what Ryan almost took from her. Not just her marriage, not just her family, her own voice. If you've listened this far, maybe you needed this story. Maybe someone has convinced you that the people who love you are too much, that checking on you is controlling, that concern is manipulation, that isolation is independence. Sometimes that can happen. Healthy boundaries matter. But here's what I've learned. The people who truly love you don't ask you to become smaller. They don't make you apologize for existing. They don't slowly erase everyone else until they're all you have left. Real love doesn't shrink your world. It gives you the confidence to explore it. And if you're lucky, home is never the place you have to earn. It's the place that leaves the porch light on, even after you've forgotten the way back. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of a parent who never gave up on you, or made you realize how easily love can be mistaken for control, know that you're not alone, and you're in the right place. At the Second Bloom Chronicles, we share powerful stories of family, betrayal, healing, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to find your way back to the people who truly love you. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe and join our growing community. New emotional stories are waiting for you every week. And before you go, tell us in the comments. At what moment did you realize Ryan wasn't just manipulating Emily, but trying to erase her mother from her life? We read every comment, and your story may remind someone else that it's never too late to come home. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never let anyone convince you that genuine love is too much.